Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon everyone and welcome to this James Cooper Creston webinar. Today we're looking at temporary workplace relief. Just a quick introduction on today's speakers. My name is Sarah Robert and I will be joined by Charlotte Hobra. We both work in our tax team, in the international tax team. So we're looking at temporary workplace relief, but just to bear in mind this can be applicable for individuals coming to the UK, leaving the UK, or domestic moves within the UK. So what is temporary workplace relief? It's a very important tax relief to consider when somebody is working in a place that is a temporary workplace. And the amounts involved can be extremely significant because it involves items such as housing and utilities. So I'll hand over to Charlotte now to give us more details on the definition of a temporary workplace.
So, a temporary workplace is defined as a place which the employee attends in the performance of his duties in order to perform a task of limited duration or for some other temporary purpose. This can, as Sarah said, either be an assignment to the UK or within the UK. A workplace will not be temporary if the employee attends for a period of continuous work lasting more than 24 months. A period of continuous work is a period over which the duties of the employment are performed to a significant extent at that workplace. HMRC consider the duties to be performed to a significant extent if the employee spends 40% or more of their time at that place. A temporary workplace can also exist where an employee attends a place of work for less than 40% of their working time and it's not a place they would normally attend in the course of their duties. This arrangement can be for an unlimited amount of time. No single factor is actually decisive in establishing whether a second location is a permanent workplace or not. It does depend on the particular work pattern. For example, if someone regularly spends 1 or 2 days at a second location, it's unlikely, given the frequency of the visits, that each visit would be to perform a task of limited duration or for some other temporary purpose. In these circumstances, HMRC would normally presume that the second location is a permanent workplace. It's important to note that it is possible for an employee to have 2 or more permanent workplaces. It's also important to note that a temporary workplace can become a permanent workplace if either of the following happen. The employee has worked at that location for a continuous period of 24 months, or it becomes apparent that the absence from the original permanent workplace will exceed 24 months. In the instance where it becomes apparent that the absence will exceed 24 months, travel costs up to the point of change are deductible, but costs after that date are not. Therefore, if at some point during the assignment the duration is extended to beyond 24 months from the start date, the relief would actually stop at the date the extension is agreed, not at the end of the initial 24 months. Now handing back to Sarah.
So what kind of items can you claim under this relief? It's a relief claimed under travel and subsistence. So we have there on the screen some of these items, and the bottom point, home to office travel, comes under the travel arrangements because normally home to office travel is considered ordinary commuting and therefore it's taxable if the employer pays for this. But if the employee is going to a temporary workplace, then it can be claimed under the relief. The other items can be claimed, so it would typically be rental costs for the person to stay at near the temporary workplace, utilities such as electricity and gas bills, and council tax.
So, what cannot be claimed? Examples of non-deductible expenses are broadband, unless it's for business use, telephone, and laundry. It should be noted that only housing costs attributable to the actual employee fall within the relief. As a general rule, 10% for a spouse and 5% per child needs to be deducting from the housing cost to calculate the allowable amount. This does also depend on the size of the property as well, but generally a guide, if there's a spouse and 2 children, then you would have to deduct the 20% in order to calculate the amount that you can claim relief for. A further point to note when claiming the deduction for housing is that the accommodation should usually be near the workplace. So if an employee decides to live at a place of their choosing, then the cost may not be wholly allowable. For example, if an individual decides to live on the coast because they enjoy sailing, although this place of work is not nearby, then only a reasonable cost would be allowed as a deduction should the cost exceed the cost of living near the workplace.
So what is the method of relief? The way that the relief is claimed will depend very much on how the expenses have been paid. So if the employer pays expenses on behalf of the employee, so for example, they sign the lease agreement and pay the monthly rent and all utilities, these expenses would be reported on the individual's P11D, and then the individual would show these items on the tax return with a corresponding deduction under temporary workplace relief. So this would net off to zero, unless of course there are any non-deductible items such as family-related expenses. If the employer pays some of the expenses, but maybe limits that to a certain amount, then the same reporting would be done by the employer, so the P11D route, and the employee could make an additional claim for the expenses incurred personally via the tax return. And if the employee pays all the expenses himself or herself, then the claim on the tax return for temporary workplace would show these expenses as deductible. Now, we often see employers paying a round sum allowance to cover these expenses because this is a far easier way of dealing with the costs from an admin point of view. So the employer, for example, will pay the employee £10,000 to cover temporary workplace relief costs. And as this is a round sum allowance, which is not directly related to actual expenses, then it should go through payroll and be subject to PAYE in the normal way. The employee would then retain all details of the actual expenses incurred and can claim a deduction via his tax return for temporary workplace relief.
So, last but not least, what proof is required? All documentation should be consistent with an anticipated assignment of not more than 24 months, including any work permit applications. A visa length of more than 24 months would not in itself be problematic as long as the assignment contract states a maximum of 24 months and all emails and other correspondence about the assignment indicate the same. Rental agreements should also not be signed for a longer period. Another important point to note is that to be eligible for temporary workplace relief, a relationship should still exist between the employee and their home country location. So they should remain on their home country employment contract, although in some circumstances this can be suspended. It is possible in very limited circumstances for the relief to be available where an employee is on a local UK contract. But in this situation, the continuing relationship with their home country would need to be clearly demonstrated, as would the temporary nature of the UK work. Should HMRC ever inquire into the eligibility of the claim, you would need to be able to prove these points.
So we've come to the end of our presentation, and if there are any questions, we're happy to take them now. So I can see that there's one question come through, which is, how is temporary workplace relief linked to relocation expenses? So if somebody's coming from overseas, do they still get the relocation costs? Charlotte, do you want to take that one?
So yes, relocation is actually separate to the temporary workplace relief. You can claim relief for up to £8,000 of costs for relocation as long as they are qualifying relocation costs. This relief can be taken within the first 2 years the individual is in the UK, the first 2 tax years. The costs would include, for example, things like shipping costs. So that is an additional relief that can be claimed alongside the temporary workplace relief, as long as obviously the assignment falls within temporary workplace relief rules.
Okay, thank you. So if there are no further questions at this point, we have put our contact details on the screen now. If you want to send us any further questions, we'd be happy to help. Thank you.